Every so often I'll be researching something and I'll come across a casual reference to something so totally unexpected that it demands a separate video of its own. At least a quick one. And that's why today we're talking about the plan to build an international railway station at Surrey Quays. Now these days international passenger trains go from St Pancras, a formerly underused terminal station in central London. Before that, they used to go from Waterloo Station, from the section that many commuters still refer to as the International Terminal. But before that, well, therein lies our tale. The Channel Tunnel was formally inaugurated in 1994. I was actually at the ceremony, but that's another story. The inauguration came 30 years after the Channel Tunnel was first announced, and as you might imagine with such a long development period, there was a lot of faffing about. The tunnel was first announced in 1964 by Ernest Marples, which regular viewers might find somewhat ironic. Marples was the Emperor Palpatine to Dr. Beeching's Darth Vader, the man responsible for the closure of an enormous amount of Britain's railway network in the 1960s. You know, I'm sure I've made that Palpatine comparison before. Anyway, the point I'm making is that Ernest Marples was very anti-rail for a transport minister, so it's a bit weird that he'd give the go-ahead to a rail tunnel under the channel. Actually, at that time there was some debate over whether it would be rail or road, although I don't know how the road concept was supposed to work. It's hard enough to breathe in the Rotherhithe tunnel. It wasn't until 1966 that it was announced that it would, in fact, be a rail tunnel. In the intervening time, there had been a joke in an Asterix comic about how they were thinking about building a channel tunnel, but it was taking a long time. A joke that only got funnier as the years went on. Well, now the whole thing had been approved, there was a whole raft of other questions to be answered. But for the purposes of this video, the most important one is, where would the London terminus be? The two favourites in the 1970s were White City in West London and Surrey Docks in East London. Victoria and Kensington Olympia were also early suggestions that didn't go anywhere. There was also talk of a tunnel under Croydon, which in those days was the best way to experience Croydon. The Surrey commercial docks were founded in the early 19th century. They primarily traded with the Baltic and North Atlantic ports, which is reflected in the names of the old docks. Greenland Dock, Russia Dock, Norway Dock, Canada Dock. Goods offloaded here included timber, grain, furs and foodstuffs. They also supplied tallow and hemp for the shipbuilding industry nearby. But the Surrey docks suffered the same fate as the rest of the docklands. With the development of containerisation, cargo ships were too large for the Victorian docks of London, so they docked instead at Tilbury. With ever fewer ships using them, the docks here closed in 1969. In 1972, the Greater London Council, the governing body for London at the time, published their proposal for a very different kind of international trade. Essentially the problem was that with the docks gone, so too had the heart of the area. The docks and their associated industries were the major employer, and with the docks gone, much of the area was simply without purpose. A number of ideas were considered for the abandoned zone. The four favourites were a wholesale trade centre, an airport for vertical take-off aircraft, an Olympic venue, and the Channel Tunnel rail terminus. However, while this scheme would undoubtedly have brought employment and economic regeneration for the area, that was about all it had going for it. The Port of London Authority owned the land and British Rail would have to acquire that. That was going to cost a lot of money. This was not a problem with any of the other suggestions. Then there was the problem of connections. Surrey Docks was, at the time, really badly connected to the rest of the London rail network. The only railway in the area was the London Underground's East London line, which didn't even go into central London, and only connected to the rest of the network at New Cross and New Cross Gate. Now, while this was going on, London Transport was planning the tube line that would eventually become the Jubilee line, and a version of that would have taken over the East London line, running into the City and West End of London. Had this Channel Tunnel connection been authorised, it seems very likely that that version of the tube line would have been a lot more attractive to the government. However, it would also have added even more costs on top of the already expensive concept. And finally, ironically, one of the major opponents to the plan was British Rail. Sort of. British Rail at this time was divided into geographical regions, and those regions had been getting increasingly autonomous. The region that would have been most affected by the Channel Tunnel was the southern region, which I'm sure doesn't require much explanation. They objected to the link on the grounds that their lines from the south coast to London were busy with commuter trains, and there was no way in heck that they could add a bunch of trains to France on top of that. British Rail also owned the Sea Link ferry service, and those guys complained that it would be unfair competition. So the Surrey docks concept was abandoned. The docks would be redeveloped as commercial and residential properties, with the old warehouses being replaced by attractive waterfront housing. The Jubilee line would eventually come to Surrey docks via a different route, and the East London line would be extended to become part of a wider network, the Overground. The Channel Tunnel rail link would run into Waterloo, and by this time the regions had been abolished and Sea Link was gone. But the old southern region turned out to be right. The delays caused by Eurostar trains having to share with conventional commuter trains became a national joke, until the completion of the dedicated high-speed one in 2007. To be honest, I think the Surrey Docks Channel Tunnel concept was always going to be a non-starter, and as far as I'm aware, no detailed work was done on planning the terminus. But as always, it's interesting to think upon what might have been. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I think I'd like to do a bit more research into this topic, and maybe I will be returning at some point in the future. What I am definitely planning is a video specifically about Surrey Quays Station, which is how I got into this mess in the first place. So keep an eye out for that one in the hopefully not too distant future. I would like, as always, to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your ever-generous support. You are the dedicated line to my European train. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.